A single number just shook Canadian agriculture, 75.8%. That's how much China has slapped onto Canadian canola imports. In one stroke, a $5 billion export market teetered on the edge. Overnight, contracts vanished, prices collapsed, futures plunged, but the real question isn't the number itself. It's what comes next. Can Canada's farmers survive this? Or is this the moment their most valuable crop faces a devastating collapse? Across the prairies, fields of yellow stretch as far as the eye can see. Beautiful, serene, yet fragile. These aren't just landscapes, they're lifelines. Families built on generations of farming suddenly find themselves confronting uncertainty, the likes of which most have never seen. One farmer explained it in the simplest terms: when the buyer disappears, everything disappears. The farm, the town, even the school, it all feels like it's slipping away. This is the human side of trade wars. It's easy to think of tariffs and percentages as abstract numbers, but for thousands of families, these decisions are felt in kitchens, on balance sheets, and across dinner tables. And this tariff, it landed like a storm that no one saw coming. Canola is not just another crop. It's Canada's golden seed, worth billions every year. It sustains communities, drives rural economies, and gives the country a strategic voice in global agriculture. Losing access to China doesn't just mean lost sales, it means losing leverage, influence, and stability. And the timing couldn't be worse. Harvest is already underway. Contracts were signed months ago. Equipment is leased. Workers are ready. Suddenly, one policy move in Beijing threatens to upend everything. Why China? Why now? The story doesn't start with canola at all. It starts last year, when Ottawa slapped 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. That move aligned Canada with Western allies seeking to counter Beijing's growing influence. And now, in what seems like retaliation, China targets Canada's most valuable agricultural export. Officially, Beijing claims Canadian subsidies have distorted the market. Ottawa calls it punishment disguised as policy. But behind the numbers, in legal language, a bigger battle is unfolding. This is a story about power, leverage, and global influence, and the people on the ground, the farmers, the towns, the families, are caught in the crossfire. The stakes are enormous. China bought nearly $5 billion worth of Canadian canola in 2024, making it Canada's second-largest buyer. A sudden 75.8% tariff doesn't just block a market, it depresses prices worldwide. Every farmer, even those selling elsewhere, feels the squeeze. So what happens next? How does a country respond when a major market disappears overnight? And how do families survive when the rules of trade shift without warning? Even more pressing, could this crisis force Canada to rethink its entire agricultural strategy? Could this moment, painful as it is, be the catalyst for a transformation in farming, trade, and resilience that changes the future of Canadian agriculture forever? The shockwaves are already spreading. Farmers are scrambling to find new buyers. Local economies are bracing for ripple effects. And Ottawa is under pressure to act. But one question hangs over everything. Can Canada turn this crisis into opportunity, or will it simply be left counting losses? What unfolds next will shape not just the fields of canola, but the broader balance of power in global trade. This is more than a fight over a crop, it's a lesson in strategy, resilience, and how countries navigate a world where politics and economics collide with every harvest. And the truth is, while tariffs can close doors, resilience can open them. The next chapters of this story will reveal whether Canada can pivot fast enough to protect its farmers, maintain its influence, and turn disruption into momentum. So, how did this sudden escalation come about? How are farmers responding? And what moves are political leaders making behind the scenes to prevent disaster? These questions will guide us as we unravel the full story of Canada's canola crisis, a story of shock, strategy, and survival. This version keeps a tight, suspenseful hook in the first few lines, introduces the human stakes, foreshadows political and economic tension, and sets up natural curiosity for the next part. It flows like a narrative without breaking, and every paragraph pushes viewers to ask, what happens next? Canada couldn't afford to wait. The moment the tariff was announced, Ottawa sprang into action, or at least, the wheels began to turn. Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald and International Trade Minister Meninda Sidhu called urgent meetings with the Canola Council of Canada and the Canadian Canola Growers Association. The goal was simple but monumental: chart a path to survive what could be the most severe blow to Canadian agriculture in decades. At first, the urgency wasn't just political, it was personal. Farmers needed reassurance. Communities needed confidence that the government wouldn't let them face this alone. Without decisive moves, the crisis risked spreading far beyond the fields. Ottawa's response had to be strategic. Price insurance programs were expanded. Reserve funds were mobilized. Measures were rolled out to stabilize incomes and prevent the collapse of individual farms. But even with support, the question lingered. Would it be enough to offset the loss of one of Canada's most important markets? Meanwhile, the private sector moved with its own urgency. Exporters, farm organizations, and industry associations began scanning the globe for alternative buyers. Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia suddenly became more than secondary markets, they became lifelines. Within months, some regions saw Canadian canola exports increase by 20 to 30%. This rapid pivot revealed something deeper about Canada's agricultural system. Resilience isn't just about surviving shocks. It's about anticipating them, adapting quickly, and turning potential disaster into strategic advantage. But the tension didn't stop there. Inside Canada, political pressure mounted. Conservative MP Michelle Rempel Garner publicly condemned the tariffs, calling them a devastating blow to Western Canada's economy. She demanded immediate action from the federal government, warning that delays could cost lives and livelihoods. Her criticism reflected a growing frustration in farming regions where communities rely on canola not just for income, but for identity and stability. Every delayed shipment, every drop in price, sent ripples through towns dependent on this single crop. And the debate wasn't confined to Parliament. Across Canada, citizens were asking, is our government prepared for economic warfare? Can our farmers survive when politics dictates markets? Behind the headlines, analysts were watching closely. The link between Canada's electric vehicle tariffs and China's canola response was clear. It wasn't a coincidence. Beijing had sent a calculated signal. Trade disputes have consequences, and leverage matters. This was more than economics. This was a chessboard of influence, and Canadian agriculture had just been thrust into the center of it. Every decision mattered. Every move could either mitigate disaster or deepen the crisis. Yet even amid uncertainty, Canada had options. Its agricultural system had been built to absorb shocks, thanks to decades of infrastructure, logistics, and market diversification. Investment in processing technologies meant canola could be sold not just as raw seed, but as refined oils, bio-based ingredients, and clean energy products. This was a strategic pivot in progress. By moving up the value chain, Canadian producers were ensuring that no single market could hold overwhelming influence over their future. But executing this pivot wasn't simple. It required coordination, intelligence, and a clear understanding of global markets, all while keeping domestic operations running smoothly. Even as Canada mobilized, the stakes kept climbing. China, while flexing its economic muscle, also faced consequences. Raising the cost of Canadian imports meant higher domestic prices for industries relying on canola oil and animal feed. Protective measures carried risks of inefficiency, bottlenecks, and inflation, not just abroad, but at home. And this is where the story gets even more complicated. Every action triggered reactions. Every tariff could ripple across economies and supply chains. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was mounting on both sides of the Pacific. Back on Canadian soil, communities braced for the long haul. Farmers debated strategy, coordinated shipments, and re-examined production cycles. Local economies watched closely, knowing that the fate of canola wasn't just about crops, but about jobs, schools, and daily life. And yet, amid the uncertainty, a subtle transformation was underway. What could have been a crushing blow began to take the shape of opportunity. The crisis forced Canada to look beyond short-term losses. It demanded innovation, diversification, and an elevated approach to agriculture, one that saw resilience not as a fallback, but as a strategic advantage. So, the question remained, could Canada's farmers and policymakers navigate this storm? Could strategic thinking and quick adaptation turn a devastating tariff into a chance to emerge stronger? The answers were beginning to take shape, but the full picture was far from clear. New markets had to be secured. Supply chains needed realignment. Political decisions would have lasting consequences, and the clock was unforgiving. Every day without a response amplified uncertainty, risked price drops, and deepened anxiety in farming communities. For viewers watching this unfold, the key tension is clear. This isn't just a story about trade. It's about survival, strategy, and how a nation responds when a single policy can change billions in economic value overnight. Canada was in the eye of a storm, and the next moves would determine whether the canola industry simply endured or transformed itself into something far stronger, more innovative, and globally influential. Faced with a sudden wall of tariffs, Canadian farmers had no choice but to act fast. The first priority was survival, but survival quickly became a test of ingenuity, strategy, and foresight. Across the prairies, farmers examined every part of their operations. Contracts with old buyers were reviewed. Storage capacities recalculated. Delivery schedules were rearranged. Every decision carried consequences. A misstep could cost millions. A smart pivot could protect livelihoods and secure the industries. Future exporters weren't waiting for the government to solve the problem. They scoured the globe for alternatives. Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia were no longer secondary options. They became urgent priorities. Within a single quarter, some regions saw Canadian canola exports grow by 20 to 30%. That's not just recovery. It's proof of adaptability under pressure. And it wasn't just about finding new buyers. The entire value chain began to shift. Farmers and processors realized that relying on bulk exports left them vulnerable, moving up the chain into refined oils, bio-based ingredients, and renewable energy products meant creating value that no single tariff could erase. Industry leaders described it as a turning point. By transforming raw seed into higher-value products, Canada was reducing dependency on any single market, increasing competitiveness, and reshaping its bargaining power on the world stage. Suddenly, canola wasn't just an agricultural commodity, it was a strategic asset. This pivot came with its own challenges. Infrastructure needed upgrades, new partnerships required negotiation. Market intelligence had to be gathered faster than ever before. And all of this was happening while farmers were in the middle of harvest, under immense pressure, and with no time to pause. Amid this flurry of activity, one lesson became clear. Resilience isn't passive. It requires foresight, coordination, and a willingness to innovate. Those who acted quickly were beginning to see the benefits, while those slower to adapt faced mounting risk. At the same time, Ottawa continued to support farmers. Price insurance programs were expanded. Reserve funds were deployed. The government emphasized stability and reassurance, preventing panic from spreading into a deeper economic crisis. By acting decisively, policymakers gave farmers the breathing room needed to implement long-term strategies, rather than merely reacting to immediate losses. The political dimension also evolved rapidly. Conservative critics continued to pressure the government, demanding clear action and accountability. Meanwhile, Canadian leaders needed to balance diplomacy with strategic defense of their agricultural sector. Every statement, every meeting, every policy announcement was part of a broader chess game, where global perception mattered as much as domestic stability. China's move, while aggressive, wasn't risk-free. Raising the cost of Canadian canola at home meant higher prices for industries relying on it, from food production to animal feed. By trying to protect domestic farmers, Beijing inadvertently increased costs for its own consumers. That tension created an opening for Canada. Could Ottawa exploit these pressures to strengthen its position? The potential was there, but execution mattered. Farmers and industry groups also began leveraging innovation. Investment in new processing technologies transformed raw canola into products with broader applications and higher profit margins. Beyond oils for cooking, canola now became a key ingredient for renewable energy, bio-based materials, and advanced food production. By elevating the crop's value, Canada wasn't just surviving a tariff, it was creating leverage and influence. In global markets, this evolution mirrored strategies in other advanced economies, where agriculture is treated not as a vulnerable sector but as a strategic engine for growth, technology, and international influence. Canadian canola was no longer a commodity defined by a single buyer's whims. It became a portfolio of products, markets, and value-added opportunities. Designed to withstand shocks and seize advantage, analysts watching this transformation noted something striking. Over-reliance on a single market makes countries vulnerable to price swings and political decisions. Diversifying exports reduces risk, stabilizes revenue, and strengthens negotiating power. Canada was proving that foresight and adaptability could turn a crisis into opportunity. But as the weeks turned into months, results began to appear. While the Chinese market remained closed, Canada's exports to other regions increased steadily. Farmers who pivoted early saw reduced losses, and some even discovered more profitable partnerships than before. What initially looked like a devastating blow began to feel like a strategic realignment, opening doors to long-term resilience. The narrative of collapse was fading. Instead, a new story was emerging, one of strategy, innovation, and global thinking. Canola fields weren't just producing seeds, they were producing leverage, influence, and economic stability. The industry was learning a crucial lesson. In a volatile world, survival requires agility, not just production. Even as the domestic picture stabilized, global observers took note. Canada's ability to adapt under pressure sent signals about the resilience of mid-sized economies navigating unpredictable trade environments. This wasn't just about canola, it was a case study in strategy, foresight, and the power of transformation under pressure. Yet questions remained unanswered. Could this model withstand future disruptions? Could Canada maintain its newfound leverage if global tensions escalated again? The answers were unfolding in real time as farmers, policymakers, and industry leaders continued to navigate the high-stakes landscape of global trade. On the background, the political drama added tension to every move. Each negotiation with new markets, each decision to invest in processing, each public statement carried consequences. Farmers and exporters weren't just reacting to tariffs, they were maneuvering in a complex arena where economics, politics, and international relations intersected. Through it all, one truth became undeniable. Resilience isn't inherited, It's built through preparation, flexibility, and decisive action. Canada's response to the canola tariff was no accident. It was a deliberate, coordinated effort to transform vulnerability into strength, disruption into opportunity. And while this chapter was still unfolding, it was clear that the canola industry, once seen as dependent and vulnerable, was rapidly becoming a model of innovation, adaptability, and strategic foresight. This is the story of how a single policy decision in Beijing ignited a transformation across an entire industry, reshaping not just markets but the very identity of Canadian agriculture. But the story isn't finished. Challenges remain, tariffs may evolve, markets may shift, and every decision today could reverberate for years to come. So, what comes next? How will Canada leverage this new strength to secure its position in the global food system? Can innovation and strategy continue to outpace disruption? And how will the world respond as Canada's canola sector emerges stronger than ever before? The answers to these questions will guide the next phase of the story, the turning point where adaptation meets strategy, and where resilience becomes more than a buzzword. The initial shock of tariffs was beginning to fade, but the deeper transformation had only just begun. Canadian farmers, exporters, and policymakers had survived the immediate storm. Now the challenge was turning a crisis into lasting advantage. At the heart of this transformation was innovation. Canola, once exported primarily as raw seed, was now being processed into a range of high-value products, refined oils for food production, bio-based ingredients for industry, and even components for renewable energy. By elevating the crop's value, Canada was not just selling a commodity, it was building leverage in global markets. This shift had immediate effects. Processed products carry higher margins, creating revenue streams that are less sensitive to single market volatility. They also diversify the industry's portfolio, reducing dependency on any one country. Canada was no longer at the mercy of a single tariff. It was establishing resilience as a strategic asset. But the benefits extended beyond economics. By investing in processing technologies, Canada signaled something important to global trade partners. Its agriculture sector is dynamic, adaptable, and capable of innovation. This elevated Canada's standing, giving it influence in trade negotiations that went far beyond canola itself. Meanwhile, farmers continued to adapt on the ground. Some expanded into niche markets, producing specialty oils and organic canola products for health-conscious consumers in Europe and Asia. Others invested in renewable energy projects, turning byproducts into biofuels. Every decision reinforced a single idea: diversification is the antidote to vulnerability. Policy support remained crucial. Ottawa continued to provide stabilization programs, price insurance, and reserve funds. These measures prevented short-term shocks from becoming long-term crises, ensuring that farmers could experiment, innovate, and pivot without risking collapse. It was a delicate balance: protect without stifling ingenuity. Analysts watching Canada's response noted a broader lesson. Over-reliance on a single market creates fragility, but strategically investing in processing, innovation, and global diversification transforms risk into leverage. Canada's pivot wasn't just reactionary, it was forward-thinking, building long-term strength while responding to immediate pressure. The ripple effects of this transformation were also visible globally. Other countries saw that tariffs can be countered not only with negotiation but with adaptation. By quickly moving into high-value processing and diversifying markets, Canada was demonstrating a blueprint for resilience that could inspire mid-sized economies worldwide. But transformation is rarely linear. Challenges persisted. New markets required understanding of local regulations, consumer preferences, and distribution logistics. Competition was fierce, and the threat of political escalation with China still loomed, keeping every export decision high-stakes. Even so, momentum was building. Within months, Canadian exports outside of China grew steadily. European, Japanese, South Korean, and Southeast Asian markets absorbed volumes that might have otherwise been lost, and higher-value products commanded stronger prices, reinforcing the economic buffer against future shocks. This success was not just quantitative, it was qualitative. Canada was proving that resilience isn't just surviving shocks. It's strategically outmaneuvering them, using disruption as a lever to create opportunity. The canola sector was evolving into a sophisticated network of production, processing, and international trade, where every link strengthened the next. At the same time, domestic politics continued to shape the narrative. Conservative critics pressed for accountability, while government leaders emphasized strategic foresight. Public perception mattered as much as market outcomes. Canadians were watching how their leaders and farmers responded to global pressure. The interplay between politics, economics, and global strategy became a story in itself. Every tariff, every trade negotiation, every pivot in production carried a lesson. In a connected world, local decisions echo globally. A policy in Beijing can affect dinner tables in Saskatchewan. A strategy in Ottawa can reshape markets across continents. The canola industry's evolution also carried broader implications for agriculture. Canada was setting a new standard. Farming is no longer just about production, it's about strategy, innovation, and influence. By integrating technology, processing, and market intelligence, the country elevated its role in global food systems. This transformation was visible in the numbers, but also in mindset. Farmers began thinking not just about yields, but about value, resilience, and market leverage. Exporters considered geopolitical factors alongside contracts. Policymakers aligned domestic support with long-term strategic goals. The entire ecosystem was learning to operate not reactively, but proactively. And yet, the tension remained. China's tariffs hadn't disappeared. Geopolitical uncertainty lingered. The global economy was shifting, and every new challenge could test the strategies that were only beginning to show results. Could Canada maintain its momentum? Could innovation, diversification, and strategic thinking continue to outpace disruption? The early signs were promising. Canada's canola sector wasn't merely surviving, it was emerging stronger, more agile, and globally influential. What began as a potential catastrophe had evolved into a showcase of adaptability, resilience, and foresight. But every success carried a question. Could this model withstand future disruptions? Could Canadian farmers and policymakers continue to anticipate shocks and turn them into opportunities? The answers would define the sector for years to come. And in the broader narrative, this was about more than canola. It was about how nations navigate uncertain global trade environments, how they convert vulnerability into leverage, and how strategic thinking can turn disruption into long-term advantage. Canada's canola story was becoming a blueprint, a demonstration that foresight, adaptation, and coordinated strategy can turn even the most sudden and severe crisis into a path toward strength, influence, and resilience. As observers around the world watched, one truth became clear: the future of Canadian agriculture would be defined not by tariffs or trade disputes, but by the strategic choices made in the face of uncertainty. And for Canadian farmers, exporters, and policymakers, the stakes had never been higher. The fields of canola stretching across Saskatchewan and Alberta were no longer just a source of food and income. They were symbols of innovation, adaptability, and strategic foresight. They reflected a nation learning to navigate global disruption while maintaining influence and stability. Yet, even as transformation took hold, questions lingered. How would the next trade dispute be handled? Could Canada continue to pivot and adapt in an increasingly unpredictable world? And what lessons could other sectors and nations take from this remarkable story of resilience? The answers would shape not only agriculture, but the balance of power in global trade, a balance that hinges on strategy, innovation, and the ability to turn shocks into opportunities. As the dust of the initial tariff settled, a new reality began to take shape across Canada. The immediate shock had tested farmers, exporters, and policymakers. But the long-term story was emerging, one of resilience, adaptation, and strategic foresight. Across the prairies, farmers reflected on the months of uncertainty. Equipment had been pushed to its limits. Contracts had been renegotiated. Families had faced sleepless nights wondering if their livelihoods could survive. And yet, through innovation and decisive action, the canola sector had not just survived. It had transformed. This transformation was as much cultural as it was economic. Farmers were thinking differently about risk, markets, and opportunity. Exporters were no longer focused solely on traditional buyers but on creating a diverse portfolio of markets across Europe, Asia, and North America. Policymakers had learned the value of acting swiftly, supporting innovation, and coordinating responses to global disruptions. One industry leader captured it best. We realized that resilience isn't just about protecting what we have. It's about creating strength that can withstand any storm. And that philosophy had driven the pivot into high-value processing, bio-based products, and renewable energy applications. Canola was no longer simply a crop. It was a strategic asset with economic and geopolitical significance. The long-term benefits were beginning to show. Diversification reduced dependency on a single market. Higher-value products commanded better prices. Global partnerships strengthened, giving Canada leverage in trade negotiations. What had started as a crisis was now positioning Canada for long-term influence in global agriculture. Yet the human dimension remained at the heart of the story. Families who once feared collapse were now navigating a new landscape with confidence. Communities that relied on canola for their schools, businesses, and local economies saw hope return. The resilience of people on the ground proved as critical as any government policy or trade agreement, but the lessons extended beyond agriculture. This was a blueprint for nations facing unpredictable global markets. Dependence on a single partner creates vulnerability. Strategic foresight, innovation, and flexibility create opportunity. And the ability to transform disruption into leverage becomes a defining advantage in a world where political and economic forces collide. Even as Canada celebrated its early successes, the story remained unfinished. The global trade environment continues to evolve. Geopolitical tensions may flare again. New tariffs, market shifts, and technological changes could test the strategies developed over the past months. The difference now is that Canada is prepared, equipped with experience, innovation, and strategic insight to face whatever comes next. Observers worldwide have taken notice. Canada's canola sector is no longer simply a supplier of raw commodities. It is a model of how a mid-sized economy can adapt, innovate, and maintain influence in a volatile world. By investing in high-value processing, diversifying markets, and leveraging strategic policy support, Canada has turned a potential disaster into a showcase of resilience. The narrative also underscores a larger truth. Global trade is not just about goods, it's about strategy, foresight, and the ability to act under pressure. Every decision, from Ottawa to the smallest farm, reverberates across borders and markets. A single policy in Beijing can disrupt billions of dollars of exports, but strategic adaptation can turn disruption into opportunity. And so, as the fields of canola stretch across Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba, they tell a story that goes beyond farming. They speak of innovation, determination, and the foresight to transform vulnerability into power. They remind us that even in an interconnected and unpredictable world, resilience and strategy can outweigh immediate disruption. The final chapter of this story is still being written. Canada has shown that crisis can catalyze transformation. It has demonstrated that adaptation is not just survival, it is a path to influence, innovation, and long-term success. But the question remains, can this model of resilience hold in the face of future trade disputes? Will Canada continue to pivot and innovate, turning every challenge into leverage? The answers will shape the next generation of agriculture, trade policy, and economic strategy. For now, the lesson is clear. Canada's canola sector has emerged stronger, more diversified, and globally influential. It has turned a 75.8% tariff into a catalyst for strategic growth, innovation, and long-term resilience. And in doing so, it has rewritten the playbook for how countries and industries can navigate uncertainty in a volatile global economy. As we watch this story unfold, one takeaway resonates. Disruption doesn't have to define the future. Adaptation, strategy, and foresight can shape it. And Canada's farmers, policymakers, and exporters are proving that. Even in the face of sudden and severe challenges, a nation can not only survive but thrive. So, what happens next in global trade? How will Canada continue to leverage its newfound strength? Can other nations learn from this example of resilience and innovation? The answers are out there, waiting to be revealed with every harvest, every trade deal, and every strategic decision made in the months and years to come. And for viewers following this story, one thing is certain. The saga of Canadian canola is far more than a tale of tariffs and trade. It is a story of people, strategy, and the remarkable ability to turn crisis into opportunity. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Canada's approach will keep it ahead in the unpredictable world of global trade? Subscribe and hit the notification bell to follow how this story continues to unfold.